Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great webinar with our partners, Veeam and Cloudian. My name is William Bell, Executive Vice President of Products, and I have Michael Deemer, Inside Systems Engineer at Veeam, and Amit Rawlani, Director of Technology Alliances and Solutions at Cloudian. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks, Rob. Glad to be here. Thank you for having us, William.
Absolutely. And so we're going to talk about continuing the fight against ransomware. I've got some awesome technical solutions that we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, I'm going to jump into a quick poll, try to get the pulse of the people on the call today, really understand, where they think that they are in their journey and their fight against ransomware. So I'm going to toss that up right now. And so how confident are you that your organization can survive a ransomware attack, right? And we're trying to give everybody as many options as they can. I know no one wants to, feel like they're not prepared for this. But hopefully, if you're using some of the technologies we're going to talk about today, you're in a really good position, and you probably can click that "I feel very confident" button. So it's also good. It feels like only a few people aren't really sure, so that's also a solid turn of events. But looks like we've got about 50% of the attendees have voted, 21% very confident, 50% quite confident, 7% not sure, and 21% not confident, right? And so hopefully by the end of this call, we're going to give you some tools, some ideas, and if not, maybe some points of action to try to understand, how you can become more sure about whether or not you are protected from ransomware and whether you can respond to the threats that are continuing to grow. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that poll on down and move on to our next slide. So if you've been at any of our calls about ransomware in the past, you probably know by now that it's basically just exploded. 2020, 2021, COVID has left a lot of people's security practices in a little bit of disarray. It's opening up new attack vectors to infect machines and proliferate ransomware across networks. And the ransomware is getting smarter, right? And so we're really starting to get into this. There's proof points out there now that taking these types of actions as an attacker can result in significant financial windfall and ultimately an extreme lack of prosecution or any type of risk for the person that's taking these inordinate measures to try to extort an organization, right? I think, maybe with the exception of the Colonial Pipeline here in the United States, most of these situations, there's probably a few people at the FBI looking into the larger attacks, but not really confident that anyone's going to get in any sort of real trouble over this, especially since most of them are coming from Eastern Europe, Russia, and other countries, China and the like, that are putting our organizations here in the U.S. and multinational organizations around the globe at risk. And according to SonicWall, 304.7 million attempted attacks. That's you have to look at that data point and say, look, that's one organization's assessment of how many attempted attacks for ransomware there were. And of course, not all of these were successful, and most of them were of a scan type nature, right, where they were able to detect through the types of scans being run that they were attempting to distribute ransomware. But ultimately, the FBI has said that there's over 100 different strains that are circulating around. 100 different potential tools that are targeting your networks and networks like yours that have to be identified and protected against. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some, I call them foolproof ways that if you're executing on some of the playbooks that Michael and Amit are talking about, you can actually put yourself in a position where you can be confident, that you can click that very confident button next time and keep your organization protected. So when you look at all this stuff, all these new variants. We're all about viruses these days and the variants of viruses. But you look at all these variants, and now we're starting to see super advanced capabilities, right? Behavioral detection, deterministic, like inspection of systems to try to understand where the best place to go next is in order to potentially, what's the word I'm looking for? In around a security tool that might stop it in its tracks. It's learning from the protection mechanisms that people are deploying, and it's making it harder for everybody to protect their infrastructure against these types of attacks. And I hope to, whatever, that Gartner's not right here. But, they say that they predict that 75% of IT organizations are going to suffer one or more attacks by 2025. So if you're still the guy in the room that's like, that's not me, it's not going to be me, they don't care about me and my environment or my data or whatnot, I'm too small, they're not going to get a ransomware out of us, they don't care, right? They don't know you, they don't even know who you are most of the time, right? Until they actually lock up your systems and start the extortion process. So yeah, I would say that not taking some of these steps puts everybody at risk. And so what we're going to do, try to change things up a little bit. I'm going to pose a few questions to our esteemed panel, and we're going to try to talk through some of these issues as they exist today. And I'm going to start with the first question. So we talk about ransomware ad nauseum. President's talking about ransomware. Everybody's talking about ransomware and system encryption and locking down everything and impact to national security. All these things are happening. Why are we still in this position? Why are companies failing to protect themselves? So Mike, why don't you take a run at this for us?
Yeah, of course. So I think there's a bunch of really different verticals here, right? I mean, especially kind of going around the COVID, right? We've shifted from this in office, everybody's working in this secure location. We actually have, we have our firewalls, we have all of our switches, everybody's coming to a central location. And then after COVID happened, right, everybody's worked from home. So that physical barrier of security has been lifted, which gives more access to people like ransomware as a service. So there's a bunch of different little verticals here, but ransomware as a service is, it could be Joe Snow, somebody that doesn't actually know a lot about, ransomware or infrastructure or even exploits just in general. And this is where that scary kind of feeling comes in, because it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that has this extensive knowledge, that knows command line and PowerShell. They just reach out to a ransomware as a service on the black market, and then they go out and start trying to encrypt data on your behalf. So it's, it's really crazy from that perspective as well. Now, I think there's a couple other things here too, is lack of knowledge, not actually knowing how they're protected. And I think that also goes into this false sense of security, where you might have an AV, or you might have, a good layer 3 switch or layer 4 switch and a really good firewall, but maybe they're just not configured properly. And I think that's a lot of the issue there too, is having that safe feeling, but maybe not actually being able to either test or do any type of DR plan, right? So having a DR plan in place, I think, is one of those really easy things to do to mitigate large scale against ransomware and just exploits in general, because you know exactly what needs to happen first. You know what servers need to come up first. And honestly, if you have a DR plan, you're testing these plans, at least hopefully on a quarterly basis, if not a monthly basis. So I think those are a couple different things. I think there's still a broad band of things that could still be happening, but I think those really do help kind of narrow down.
I could agree more, Michael. I mean, I think that we're in a position where there's so much dynamicism to IT. To some extent, people are taking their eye off the ball, right? They know that these things are problems, but they're worried about some other problem. And then you add more attack vectors on top of that, and things get out of control, right? And
absolutely,
IT security staffing underruns to that mix, and you end up in a really bad situation really quick. So I think that's where we're at. Okay, so question 2: people outside of IT industry have more general awareness of ransomware. We talked about that. Heads of state, CEOs of companies. is this actually helping? Like, is this helping organizations transform amid their protection strategies?
Yeah. So, we've all seen, and we just spoke about it, that ransomware is a threat of the day or the year or the last 2 years at least, as we've known, right? And everybody is aware of this. Everybody's talking about it. The attacks like the Colonial Pipeline definitely bring a lot of focus and attention to how do we track down the perpetrators and what kind of punishments do we give. But William, you're absolutely right in terms of if you look at the broader range of attacks, the government does not have a solid way of going behind the state actors that are actually doing these kind of attacks. The ransomware as a service problem that Michael mentioned is real, and there's no real way of tracing payments made in cryptocurrency and what have you. So, even though people outside of the industry are getting aware, the things that are actually happening behind the scenes is not really about going after the perpetrators, but actually putting in more onus and more responsibilities on the businesses themselves. So if you look at what happened about a year back, the U.S. Treasury came out with a guidance from their Office of Foreign Asset Controls, OFAC, and Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. These are quite some acronyms there. But what they talk about is that under the U.S. Sanctions Act, companies and businesses that are making these kind of payments, ransomware payments, they typically don't know where these cryptocurrencies are headed. They could be headed to a country like North Korea, and guess what? That's on the sanctions list, and the business can then be held responsible for sanctions violations by the U.S. Treasury Department. So the onus is all coming up to the enterprises, the businesses themselves, to make sure that they are not making these payments to bad actors. So this is about our whole system trying to discourage the payments being made for these ransomware rather than actually trying to stop it, because honestly it's very difficult to stop and trace these. In fact, if you look at what's also happening in the cyber insurance space, which is the fastest growing insurance market today, estimated at $5 billion in the coming year, the cyber insurance companies are now asking their customers to have a strategy in place, including specifically solutions for disaster recovery, specifically data immutability, in order to even get cyber insurance. Because a lot of times these cyber insurance companies are the ones making the payments for a ransomware attack, and they are the ones who are going to be held responsible for the payment made by the Treasury Department. So overall, the impact that more general awareness about ransomware is having is that there is more onus on business and business owners to make sure that they have the system in place to protect their data and not have to make these payments because there's a lot more behind the lines than just making economical payments here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in that cyber insurance space, we get a chance to talk to a lot of customers about what their plans are, and I've heard nothing but they want to reduce my benefit, they want to up my payment, right? And I have to believe that ransomware payments are affecting this, right? Because I don't get the feeling generally that security risks are on the rise for sure, but I don't get the feeling that the general purpose hacking and or DR, like disaster things that cyber insurance was really originally built for the most part, right? I don't believe that is on the rise at such a level that it's outpacing new entrants and new payers into the cyber insurance space, but yet rates are just skyrocketing. So I guarantee you that Amit, you're right, that ransomware is having a big impact on this. And I love the stuff that the government's starting to look at, right? Like, if you pay these ransoms, you can be held responsible for giving money to somebody that you're not supposed to. So I think that's a fantastic way to address it. All right, so the third question before we get into some of the heavier technical content is, how is active ransomware response? And when we say that word, we mean endpoint detection and analysis tools that are being used by organizations, as well as immutable storage. How has this impacted companies' abilities to protect themselves? Amit, we'll start with you, and then we'll do Mike.
Right. So I can talk a little more about the immutability part of it. The whole technology about endpoint security as well as perimeter security. There's a lot of activity happening in that space to detect the ransomware attacks as they're happening, and the bottom line comes to the fact that in the case of an attack and in the case of penetrating your IT network, what we are seeing more and more from a solution perspective is to have an immutable copy of your data all the time, right? And this actually starts with, it used to be all about, you need to have a backup of your copy, but hackers are also going after pure backup. So now you need to have an immutable copy of your backup on a storage that can actually protect your data, and in that sense, act as the last line of defense against these kind of attacks. In fact, if you look at what the cyber insurance players are asking for from some of our customers, is for almost 6 months of data immutability to be certified by them even before they can get to the cyber insurance. In some cases, they're offering as much as 15 to 20% discount for something like that. So from a technology perspective, there is the active detection of ransomware as it is happening, but there is also a very important piece of having this last line of defense that nobody can get through.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and I could agree, tenfold with that. I think immutable is one of those new forms of repositories that really do open up a lot of eyes and a lot of different alleys for different partners and clients out there. But pairing that with, some active ransomware response with like VMware per se, where it's going out, scanning your environment, making sure that there's no type of weirdness going on. And what I mean by weirdness is, hey, your normal backups is only consuming like a couple gigs a night. And then all of a sudden you're having hundreds or even maybe a petabyte of data just go over the wire, and you're seeing encryption going on. And that's why we could have some eyes and ears to actually what's going on. So not only do you have that immutable piece of data that's, either offsite or just completely on-prem, but we can pair that with actually having some type of alarm to let us know that, hey, something's actually going on. We should look at this and really kind of take a deep dive at our environment and actually have a very holistic view of exactly what's kind of going on.
Yeah, we see like so many different cat and mouse games in the endpoint XDR space with organizations that are fighting against these threats, essentially trying to detect them early. It's not about stopping them from happening completely, because it's once you get to an endpoint and an endpoint has been penetrated with some type of poor or malware material, right? You end up in a position where it's all about just stopping it before it takes over your whole network. And so we see things like essentially like little honeypots sitting on endpoints that are they're looking for encryption, any type of encryption of the data that sits inside of these folders, and flagging it as a potential risk and serving that back up to some type of centralized reporting mechanism that a company is using. So many different ways. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike for a little bit, and he's going to talk about what Veeam's doing in the space, give you some updates on V11, some new technologies, and kind of just get everybody generally updated on what Veeam's up to.
Yeah, of course. So really the very first thing I want to talk about is hardened Linux repositories. What is a hardened Linux repository, right? I think that's a lot of people question, at least top of the head, right? So let's kind of go over what is a Linux repository or a Linux hardened repository for Veeam. So this is an immutable repository that's on-prem that we can actually use for a completely immutable target. So instead of, having it pass out to object storage right away, you can actually have something on-prem for quick turnaround restores, right? So you can not only have, typically you have your NAS or file share or some type of spinning disk that we land locally with for quick turnaround restores, but now we can kind of replace that with more of an updated, hardened, more security vertical, which is going to be the hardened Linux repository. And the biggest thing around that is it's malware safe, right? So all these exploits that William and Amit have been talking about today, and regardless of what vertical you guys are in, I don't care if it's healthcare or across the board of whatever vertical you guys are up against, it's all going to be the same, because at the end of the day, the ransomware necessarily, yes, it is looking for certain types of data, but it's also just trying to do a dragnet across the entire internet and seeing what they can get out there and seeing who is not protected and what they can actually expunge out of these particular, successes in their book, right? Because once they get a hold of the data, and let's just pretend, just for giggles here, that you do get hit with ransomware, but you have a Linux hardened repository, well, guess what? It's not going to go very far, because you have an immutable target on-prem. You can just do a quick restore and everything's good. And really, at the end of the day, what is it going to do? It's really going to be able to deny the deletion of backups. Once we set this immutable flag in play, the particular type of backup is worm. So write once, read many. Of course, we can always come back and restore from it. But once that immutable flag is on there, we just can't put any new data on top of that the old data. So it's just going to have to build on the VMDK or VHD for that side. Now, kind of moving into my next slide here, I'm going to be talking about more about how we can do a little more around the security side of the hardened Linux repository. And really the biggest thing is we use a non-root account. And the biggest thing with that is it's single-use credentials. So it's one time only, and those basically get scrubbed and put into a special, I'm going to put a quote-unquote locker out there. These single-use credentials are very, very good because, they're single-use, right? So it's only that one-time use connecting the hardened Linux repository to the Veeam backup and replication server. And at the end of the day, we're not using NTFS or REFS, but we're using XFS because we're on Linux. And then we can still use that to leverage block cloning. And if you actually take your eyes down to the right-hand corner there, you're going to see how easy it is to set an immutable flag. Now, with setting an immutable flag, all it is honestly a little checkbox, and how many days do you actually want it to be immutable? In this particular case, 30 days. And just like you heard earlier, a lot of clients out there need these, 30, 60, maybe 90-day retention policies so that their, cyber insurance is through the roof. And this is something that easily can be done. And I think the other thing that kind of goes along with hardened Linux repositories is 3-2-1, is 3 different copies of your data, 2 different forms of that particular media, whether it's, tape or SSD, and then having one off-site. But having one immutable in that particular form and fashion is also just as needed as having one off-site, because immutable target is one of those things I think is absolutely mission critical to the overall schema of what we really need to talk about. And then here on our next slide, what I want to talk about is actually going to be archive tier. Now, I would assume some of you guys may know, some of you guys may not, but performance and capacity tier have been around for Veeam for a long time at this point. This whole slide really is sober. Scale out backup repository job. This is how we move data from our local performance tier, aka the local spinning disk, to object storage, or even all the way to more cold storage with like archive tier and things like that. So let me kind of break this down to you at a more holistic view. So when your backups land for the very first time, they land on performance tier. This performance tier is really just spinning disk that's presented to the Veeam backup and replication server as the local target. We do have to land on a local target first before we move out to capacity tier or archive tier. Now, with that being said, that performance tier could be, spinning disk, that could be a file share, iSCSI, really anything that we can just present to the Veeam backup and replication server as spinning disk. Now, next is going to be the capacity tier. So this is the next move or copy in that particular side of SOBR, scale out backup repository job. So whether you're going off to the 5,000-pound gorillas, Azure, AWS, or even Cloudian, and we can also throw Phoenix NAP in there as well as a capacity tier, the target. So with that being said, there's a bunch of different things that we can do just to move the data right off site. Now, there's also the new one, which is a V11 feature, which is called Archive Tier. Archive Tier is great, especially for the partners and clients that really want to make sure that GFS is involved, so grandfather, father, son. So this really makes sure that we're going to be able to save space. There's a lot of extra cool stuff that comes around the GFS side, and then moving that into Archive, which is really your deep and cold tier object storage. So, you know, it's all policy based. So your grandfather, father, son, so weeklies, monthly, yearlies, and these are going to be active pools of those particular types of data. And so let's just say you're landing in Amazon, you can land in Amazon Glacier. You're landing in Microsoft Azure, you're going to land, if you want to, you can land in the archive tier, the storage archive tier for Blob. But one thing I do want to mention here is you can't go to either or. So if you're in Amazon, you go to Amazon Glacier. If you're in Azure, you go to Azure Blob archive tier. You can't necessarily mix and match as of right now. That is something coming down the line, but as of right now, it's like for like. So that's one of the biggest things I want to talk about is really making sure that not only do we have, you know, that local performance tier could be that immutable target that I was talking about a little earlier, that hardened Linux repository, and then we could pair that with either a Phoenix NAP or a Cloudian. And then if you really, really wanted to, and you were using the 5,000-pound gorillas, and you wanted that extra step in cold storage, you could go to Glacier or Blob storage tier as well. All right, so the next thing I really want to talk about, and I think this is one of the cool things, is continuous data protection, or CDP. This is really good for these big transactional databases, these resistance critical workloads that need near zero time recovery point objectives. So maybe you have SQL, you have Oracle, you have these big transactional databases that are absolute your money makers, and you have to make sure they're up at all particular times, because if you go down, you lose money, you lose ROI, right? And this is where CDP really comes in and shines, is we can really drop those RPOs down to either minutes or seconds, just really kind of depending on architecture and how little of downtime do you really need. And really, this kind of all boils down to like a DR plan, really kind of having one of those in place. And I think I spoke to it a little earlier, but I really think a DR plan is one of those things that having in place or even talking about can really help tremendously. I used to be an MSP admin before coming to Veeam, and being somebody that has went through ransomware and has been through these attacks at 3, 4 in the morning, having, you know, a DR plan in place, it helps so much, because guess what happens when things go awry? Everybody gets called in and everybody has a different task, but sometimes it might be their first time going through ransomware. So really making sure that we can bring these critical workloads back up in a near zero time fashion is absolutely critical, so we can restore those services back to end users and get everybody on their, get everybody back to their normal daily jobs. So that's kind of CDP in a nutshell. And then really the biggest thing that I think would be next is the expanded instant recovery. So we talked about those near time RPOs, but now let's talk about those RTOs. So the recovery time objective. So how long does it take until we can basically get services back to end users? And I think this is one of those things that and it happens every single time there's a big event, whether it's small or big. You guess who really needs the data right then and right now, and always kind of throws their hands up when they can't get it, and that's end users, right? So if we can really minimize the time of production being down, I think this is really great for that. Is because we have these, you know, instant VM recovery of SQL and Oracle and NAS. So let's just pretend that, you know, you have a NAS go down, your network attached storage. Then, you know, a lot of people lean onto that every day to make sure that their jobs are going off, and making sure that everything is confluent across the board. and let's just say something happens, we can do an instant VM recovery and publish a NAS, or we can publish a SQL Server or Oracle database at a very quick and very fast function to make sure that these particular mitigations are something that we can just do, and making sure that we have ultra low RTOs. All right, so what are some of these drives for change, right? So a lot of this is really kind of stemming from needing the particular challenging RTO and RPO times. A lot of times you ask a particular client or partner, hey, what is your RTO or what is your RPO? And sometimes it takes them a little while to really formulate exactly what that may be. But really, at the end of the day, the biggest thing is nobody wants to be down. Nobody needs or wants to have their databases down for any amount of time, and especially something that's very effective to their end users, or SQL, Oracle, SharePoint databases that we can really turn around and publish very quickly. So really, that's where this really stems from, is having this need for never being down, always on, and more people aren't willing to pay the piper to be down. They really want to make sure that from a security standpoint, if anything happens, we can just move forward and we have Veeam to back it up, or to do an instant VM recovery, SQL, Oracle, or even just anything in the production environment. And again, this is something that we do all the time. So especially, I was just talking about SQL and Oracle, we can publish that in a production environment regardless of the size. And I think that's something really crazy to talk about, is regardless of the size of the backup. And I think that is something that a lot of other competitors have a hard time doing, is the size portion. Sure, they might be able to get it up fast, but is it the full database? Is it actually working? Can your end users work off of it? And these are some of those questions I would absolutely ask yourself when kind of shopping around. And then next is, how do we make sure that the NAS, so that network attached storage, that all the end users rely on, is not going to be a hindrance to the end users. And this is how we can publish an entire file share directly from the backup. And then the last one here is, whether you're running in VMware or Hyper-V, we can flip to either one of those. And this kind of leads me to the Veeam Service Provider Console. So the Veeam Service Provider Console is one of those free services, at least for the service provider. And it gives you guys a very great overview of what's going on. So if you guys bring your eyes down to the very bottom here, I'm going to kind of show you what it looks like. So you're going to have maybe your virtual server, so your virtual machines, you have your workstations, you have your physical servers, and then you have your NAS, right? And you want to send all of that data to the service provider. You want to send that to Phoenix NAS. You absolutely can. Now, what are they going to be able to do? They're going to be able to, replicate that data or just back up that data offsite. But the biggest thing is making sure that it's able to be seen, right? You want some type of visibility there, making sure that, the data is where it is. And that's where the Veeam Service Provider comes into play. Actually, there's going to be the Veeam Service Provider V6 coming out very, very soon. It should be coming out, I think, in the next couple of weeks here. And then that should allow for even more flexibility, more concurrency within inside of the Veeam platform, but really all around, because it is the eyes and ears for the Veeam service provider side to kind of see in all your virtual machines, your workstations, and your physical server. So a lot of good stuff there. And then, of course, if it's protected in the cloud, so if you have maybe EC2 instances or Azure instances, those can also still be seen from the Veeam Service Provider Console. So there's a lot of cool stuff that the Veeam Service Provider Console does, and gives a lot of extra flexibility to not only the service provider, but also the end users as well. So really at this time, I think I'm all done with my side. I'm going to pass it over to Amit over at Cloudian, and he's going to be able to take it from here.
Thank you, Michael. And so folks, what I want to quickly touch upon here is a little background on Cloudian and how we come together with Veeam and provide you with a ransomware protection solution, which can also be delivered through Phoenix NAS. Okay, so for those who are not aware, Cloudian is an S3 compatible object storage system, which is built purely on the S3 APIs. Now, for those who are not aware, S3 is an API that was introduced by AWS, and AWS has their own product around that in the public cloud that goes by the same name, which is AWS S3. since it's an API, we've taken the same one and we built our product natively on that. So what you get when you buy Cloudian is the same cloud storage which has made AWS as successful as it is, but under your control in your data center or available through our friends at Phoenix Snap as well, right? So the core capability of Hyperstore is that it's a storage target. It is a capacity storage tier, and it works great for any kind of unstructured data and scales into exabytes of storage capacity. You can start small as a 3-node cluster and go into hundreds of petabytes with the same cluster increasing in a granular manner, right? If you look at the right, I've listed a couple of accolades that we've got from analysts across various spectrums, whether it's being the repeat recipient of the Customer Choice Award for object storage, or being ranked number 1 in Gartner's critical capability forum, so to speak. One of the biggest thing that we offer to our customers is a hardened secure storage. We in Cloudian take security very, very seriously, and have hardened the storage and have certified the storage systems against a bunch of regulatory compliance requirements that are validated by third party, specifically going towards protecting your data against the threat of ransomware and some of the other threats that are available. The use cases for Cloudian start with anything that you may want to store on the unstructured data side, in the capacity side. Starts with backup archive, security and surveillance, storage as a service, and of course, ransomware protection compliance are pretty big use cases for us. So the topic of the day, right? Ransomware protection, and how do we implement ransomware protection with a storage device, and that all starts with implementing Worm on Cloudian. Now, for Worm, for those who don't know, is an acronym for write once, read many, and it's an implementation of how do you actually lock up your data once it lands onto the storage system. And for that, Cloudian supports has taken a standards-based approach and supports S3 object log, which is also something that Veeam supports, and we'll get into that. And what object log does is it gives you the capability of defining a bucket within your storage system that is a lock bucket, and any data that lands into that bucket is going to be locked up and made immutable. By what immutable just means, it's going to be tamper proof, so nobody can modify or delete that data for a certain period of time that is defined at the time of creation of buckets, right? So it's in short, what object lock does is it blocks the object version from being modified or deleted during the customer defined retention period. As simple as that. And this is a very, very stringent lock. Next slide, please. So the standard actually defines 2 different modes for object lock, and we support both of them. The governance mode is where you would be intending to protect your data against accidental deletions from various different departments within the company, and your administrator will have some special administrative key to go in and unlock the data just in case there is a need to do so in case of accidental locking. And then there's the compliance mode, and this is where the integration of Cloudian and Veeam come together. Veeam supports the compliance mode, we support the compliance mode. This is the stringent mode for object lock, which you would need for ransomware protection. In this mode, once you lock up the data for a certain period of time, it becomes completely immutable all the way down to the root level. So even your administrator will not be able to modify or delete this data for the duration that you've locked the data up. And this is what you need to showcase as a technology implemented for third-party regulatory requirements, or even for some cyber insurance cases. So we support those modes, and it really gives you a very, very stringent protection against the threat of ransomware. And features like object lock are, at the end of the day, software features. What Cloudian does in addition is it shifts the storage when implemented in worm mode in a hardened manner. What we ship with the storage at that point is we include secure shell, integrated firewall, role-based access controls, and all of these security features together create that hardened storage layer that protects your data. In fact, in the worm mode, Cloudian software ships with root access disabled. You will have a privileged access that sits just below, just above the root access, but your root access will be disabled, so nobody can really tamper with the system, even at the operating system level. Even if you have a hacker that's very sophisticated, hacks into at the OS layer, they will not be able to get root permissions to tamper with your storage system, and that's where your data is going to be completely secure. If you look at all of the certifications that the storage system has acquired over a period of time, all of these, whether it's the SEC, Rule 17A4, CFTC, FINRA, all of these are assessing the storage for the stringency of implementation of security features. So when you actually implement the storage in the worm mode, you do get complete tamper-proof protection against ransomware. And how it works is pretty simple, right? So your workflow does not change. Everything starts with the application layer. So in this case, you would have Veeam, where you saw different layers within Veeam. There's a primary tier, the capacity tier, and then there's archive tier. Cloudian would be on the capacity tier, and you would start with enabling your backup workflow in Veeam and checking the box on immutable data storage. As the backup workflow starts, the parameters that are set on the Veeam side, the immutability flag and the retention time frame, get inherited automatically by Cloudian, and beyond that, anything that lands in that locked bucket is made tamper-proof or immutable. Now, even if you have a hacker get into your network and try to encrypt your data, delete your data, they will not be able to. And Veeam will be able to retrieve a clean copy as many times as required from the object lock bucket. It is as simple as that. There is no additional steps required other than your normal standard backup workflow. And all of these things can be had as a service. Phoenix Snap has a great offering around backup services as well as storage services for just general storage requirements and or ransomware protection requirements. So I think that's what I wanted to showcase to you guys. I'll pass this on to William from now.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amit, for everything. And yes, actually everything that Michael or Amit has talked about today and the technologies that they support, we support on their behalf as well, right? And so we're able to deliver cloud-based consumption of pretty much all the technology, actually all the technologies that have been talked about today, right? And so, what makes it different is the ability to pay for what you use, right? Pay for what you use, access to all the great things that Amit just talked about with Cloudian. Helpful team of support people that understand the applications that you're using internally, as well as the platforms on the back end in an intimate way, right? I love our support partners, but a lot of times our teams have so much experience with a platform that we're as good or better than the first line of support you're going to get from a vendor. So I think that there's so many things that we can offer around bringing both Cloudian, S3 as a service, and backup services from Veeam to the market. We've been expanding this footprint around the globe for the last 3 years. And now we're covering 5 different continents with backup and availability services, IT infrastructure services, and so many different ways to recover. That's the thing I think that makes us different. It's not a one size fits all. Okay, you have to use this backup technology, you have to use this storage technology, and then we can support you. No, right? We have so many different infrastructure options. There is something for you from a production hosting perspective, from a data resiliency, backup and archival and recovery as a service perspective. There's just so many different ways that we've built solutions to help organizations kind of overcome a lot of the challenges that we talked about today. And so I'm going to do the shameless plug thing, and I'm going to put this out there. If anybody wants to talk to PNAP about backup and DR, and or even if you want to talk to Veeam or Cloudian, just hit yes, please contact me, and then we'll get you in the hands of them for sure, right? We want to make sure our partners are, empowered to be able to help you guys directly if PNAP isn't the right fit for your business. So I will leave that up. And with that, I'm going to go into some questions. All right, we've got a few that I think are probably worth talking about. All right, maybe this is kind of a two-part question. It might take Veeam and Cloudian to answer this, but can you guys, or maybe I'll answer it, but can you guys talk about the differences between the Veeam Insider Protection capabilities and the object lock capabilities from Veeam? So whoever wants to take it, just shout.
Yeah, I guess I can take that one. So I would consider the inside protection policy or protection as more as, let's just say, hey, something happens to your on-prem prod location, and the hacker, malicious software, ransomware, Trojanware, whatever exploit that may be, they're just deleting the backup. So they're just really trying to mitigate against that. And that's where insider protection comes in and allows for that data to actually just flow to the Cloud Connect provider or the service provider, aka Phoenix NAP. So the data technically never gets deleted. It really just gets moved, lifted, and shifted to a different data center, allowing for a quick turnaround and restore. Now, object lock, on the other hand, is I think, a completely different facet, where we're actually, that particular data is locked. So it's ransomware proof from the get-go. It has worm on it. It's a little bit different of a protocol just all around, where this is actually protecting the repository, and the other one's protecting the data from really the production site and moving it to like a DR site.
All right, I love it. So let's grab another one here. I think that would be good. Amit, talk to me a little bit about like some of the stated limitations around S3 and or Cloudian Hyperstore, size limits on objects, number of objects that can be stored. What does that look like today?
So there's no real limitation on the size of the object. That's actually the beauty of object storage, right? It just takes the object and stores it as a blob. Your object can be as big as it needs to be, or it is. Internally, what we do is we do chunk up the objects into 10 megabyte chunks, and that's just from an efficiency of storage and management perspective. But from an external perspective, the object, there's no real limitation on the number of the size of the object or the number of objects that you could want. Now, there are certain design considerations that you would want to take just based on how your applications are are going to be designed. And when you're uploading large objects to the object storage, you probably want to make use of the multi-part upload just from a efficiency of moving data between networks and what have you. But there is no real limitation on object size or object numbers. Okay.
Got it. Perfect. So with the hardened repository, Michael, single-use credentials, are they generated by Veeam, or are they something that is like you're putting them in, you're creating them manually every time you create a new repository?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So they're actually created. So there's actually one real true way to do it. So no, there's just a single-use credential that is used once just to establish the connection between the repository and that Veeam backup and replication box. So you're not really using those credentials anytime other than that first initial sync, and then those credentials are stored in a different log in a different place with the configurational backup. Allows for a lot of flexibility kind of going forward.
Awesome. And then finally, I think we'll take so what does it look like from a Veeam perspective to manage multiple repositories? Is it something where on each job I can determine where I want it to go, or like what does that look like, and what do you see people doing in the field to use multiple different types of storage? You mentioned archive tier and capacity tier is a sober extent. Maybe just walk people through what that looks like.
Yeah, of course. So it really kind of depends, and I like to say Veeam is one of these particular software vendors that we can really cut up a whole bunch of different ways, and it really comes down to what's the ultimate ending goal for the client or the partner or the end user, right? But again, yeah, we can really kind of go anywhere. We can go from your local on-premise, so just landing local, maybe on like a hardened Linux repository, to even moving this into more object storage. So if you wanted to, you can stuff that out to either Cloudian or Phoenix Snap, or even maybe one of the 5,000-pound gorillas out there. And that's where Sober really comes into play. And that Sober job is allowing for flexibility across all these different types of storage arrays, whether they're, your on-premise, your object storage, or maybe even your deep archival storage. We can start to spread that load out. So a lot of times what happens is, we'll land data locally, and then we move it to like a Phoenix Snap or Cloudian. And then, maybe we need to move it to another cold storage. We can send a copy of that data down the line, or just, maybe start to have a retention policy that says after X amount of days, we don't care about this data because we're not looking for long-term data. It's very, very independent per client, but there's a lot of different ways that we can really slice the pie here and make the data go to exactly where we need to and the retention that's required at the point in time.
Love it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to help us, learn about ransomware and how you can protect yourself. I want everyone to stay safe, and please look out for our next webinar. I'm sure we're gonna have a great topic. We always do. We got great partners that joined us today. Thanks, Amit. Thanks, Michael, and I'll see everyone again next time.
Thank you, folks. Thanks, William, and thanks, team.